The night was silent, but the city burned with pride and excess. Wine flowed like rivers, while feasting nobles laughed beneath golden ceilings. No one noticed the enemy at the gates. No one heard the silent march. A kingdom stood on the edge of oblivion, unaware of its final hour. This was Babylon, once the crown jewel of Mesopotamia, now doomed. And at the center of it all sat Belshazzar, the last ruler of a dying empire. He was not officially king, yet he ruled in all but name. His father, Nabonidus, had abandoned Babylon to live in distant deserts. While his father prayed to forgotten gods, Belshazzar held the throne alone. For years, he managed the empire's affairs, fought off growing threats. But nothing could prepare him for what was coming from the east. A storm was rising, and its name was Cyrus the Great. Cyrus was not just another warlord or petty king. He was a conqueror, a leader of the Persian Empire with destiny in his eyes. His armies were disciplined, his strategies unmatched by any in the region, and he had set his sights on Babylon, the richest city in the known world. Walls that had stood for centuries would soon face their greatest test. And inside those walls, Belshazzar lived in luxury, blind to his fate. That fateful night, he hosted a banquet unlike any before. 1,000 nobles dined beside him, drinking from sacred vessels of gold. These goblets had once belonged to the Temple of Jerusalem. They had been taken when Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the holy city. They were used for drunken revelry in a palace built on arrogance. It was an act of defiance, perhaps even sacrilege, and the gods took notice. Suddenly, a hand appeared without warning, moving across the wall. It wrote in silence, leaving behind only mystery and fear. Belshazzar saw the message but could not understand its meaning. Terror gripped him as his knees trembled and his heart pounded wildly. He called for magicians, astrologers, and wise men to interpret the words. None could explain what had been written in divine judgment. Then came Daniel, a foreign exile known for interpreting dreams. He was summoned in haste, brought before the trembling king. Daniel read the writing and spoke the truth that no one wanted to hear. Mene, mene, tekel, parsin, he said, voice calm despite the chaos. God has numbered your days, found you wanting, and divided your kingdom. That very night, the prophecy would come true beyond doubt or denial. Outside the city walls, Persian soldiers moved unseen through the dark. Cyrus had diverted the waters of the Euphrates to slip beneath the gates. The mighty Babylonians were too drunk, too distracted to notice the end. The city that had stood for centuries fell without a single sword drawn. And Belshazzar, the last great ruler of Babylon, met his doom in silence. There are many versions of how he died, none more certain than the next. Some say he was killed defending the palace. Others claim he tried to flee. The book of Daniel says he was slain that very night by unseen hands. History records that Babylon passed into Persian rule without resistance. Yet the image remains, a man who laughed as his world crumbled around him. Who was this man who ruled as king without bearing the title? His full name was Belshazzar, which means, "O God, protect the king." Though he never wore the royal crown, he bore the weight of kingship. His father, Nabonidus, had left him to manage the empire alone. For years, Belshazzar upheld order while Nabonidus worshipped distant stars. And in doing so, he became the last hope of a fading dynasty. Nabonidus had been a strange and controversial ruler. He spent years away from Babylon, living in the desert oasis of Tema. He devoted himself to the moon god Sin, ignoring the god Marduk. The priests of Marduk, powerful and influential, resented his neglect. They saw Nabonidus as a heretic, a ruler unworthy of Babylon's legacy. And they turned to Belshazzar, hoping he might restore their favor. But Belshazzar inherited a kingdom already weakened by internal strife. The people grew restless, the priesthood angry, and enemies gathered outside. Persia loomed on the horizon, a force that could not be ignored. Despite his efforts, Belshazzar could not stop the tide of history. Babylon was a giant with feet of clay, and time had finally caught up. The fall of Babylon was not sudden, but inevitable. Its decline had begun long before Cyrus ever marched toward its gates. Trade routes shifted, new powers rose, and Babylon lost its dominance. Even its own people questioned whether the gods still protected it. And when the city opened its gates without a fight, it seemed symbolic. Not a conquest, but a peaceful transfer of power from old to new. Yet the story of Belshazzar did not die with him. It lived on in the pages of the Book of Daniel, retold for generations. Artists painted scenes of the feast, the ghostly hand, the king's terror. Poets wrote of his downfall. Philosophers pondered the meaning of fate. His name became a symbol of pride, excess, and divine retribution. And his tale reminds us that no empire lasts forever. The real historical record paints a different picture than the biblical one. Ancient tablets confirm Belshazzar existed, though not as sole king. He was co-regent under Nabonidus, acting in his place during his absence. This explains why some sources do not list him among Babylon's kings. But the cuneiform texts also show he held immense authority and influence. He commanded armies, issued decrees, and led the city in times of crisis. Archaeological discoveries, such as the verse account of Nabonidus, describe how Nabonidus abandoned Babylon to live in Arabia for 10 years. During that time, Belshazzar governed the land and defended its borders. He was a capable leader, though burdened by the failures of his father. Together, they presided over the final chapter of Babylon's independence. Cyrus entered Babylon not as a destroyer, but as a liberator. He claimed to bring peace, to restore temples, to honor the gods of the land. He allowed exiles to return home, including the Jews taken by Nebuchadnezzar. This fulfilled ancient prophecies and gave Cyrus divine legitimacy in many eyes. A transition was smooth, almost peaceful, yet it marked the end of an era. Babylon did not vanish overnight, but its glory faded with time. Under Persian rule, it remained important but never regained its former power. Later, under Alexander the Great, it was briefly considered his capital. But after his death, it was gradually abandoned, overtaken by newer cities. Bricks were taken for other projects, temples crumbled into dust, and eventually, even its name was buried beneath layers of history. The ruins of Babylon lie today in modern-day Iraq, near Baghdad. Tourists can walk among broken walls and crumbling ziggurats. Signs of its former grandeur remain, though much has been lost to time. The Ishtar Gate stands reconstructed in Berlin, a reminder of its beauty. But the city itself is silent, whispering only to those who listen closely. Belshazzar's name lives on in literature, art, and theology. He appears in operas, paintings, poems, and films throughout history. Rembrandt's famous painting captures the moment of the writing on the wall. John Martin's dramatic depiction shows Babylon engulfed in divine wrath. Each artist interprets the story differently, yet all share a common theme. Pride leads to ruin, and even the mightiest can fall in a single night. The moral of Belshazzar's story is timeless and universal. It warns against arrogance, excess, and the belief that power is eternal. It speaks of divine justice, of signs ignored, of warnings unheeded. And it reminds us that no matter how strong a kingdom may seem, there is always something greater waiting in the shadows beyond the walls. So who was Belshazzar, truly? A king without a crown, a ruler born too late to save his city. He inherited a legacy that was already crumbling beneath his feet. He tried to hold together an empire that had already begun to fall. And when the end came, he was there, feasting while the world changed. Perhaps he knew, deep down, that nothing could stop what was coming. His story is not just about the fall of a man, but of a civilization. It is the story of Babylon, once the beating heart of Mesopotamia. Of ziggurats that touched the sky, of laws carved in stone, of myths told in firelight. It is the story of a city that believed itself immortal, until it wasn't. And in that, we see a reflection of every empire that has risen and fallen since. We remember Belshazzar not because he saved Babylon, but because he failed. His name is a cautionary tale, a lesson written in ancient ink and whispered through time. And as long as humanity builds, conquers, and falls, his story will endure. Because in the end, no city is eternal, no king is untouchable, no empire is safe. And the writing on the wall can appear at any moment for anyone.
Thank you for watching. The story of Belshazzar, the last king of Babylon, as told in the book of Daniel, is filled with powerful lessons that still speak to us today. Belshazzar is a classic example of how pride and arrogance can lead to a person's downfall. He knew the story of his ancestor Nebuchadnezzar, who had been humbled by God for his pride, yet he chose to ignore those lessons and continued in his own arrogance. Belshazzar felt secure behind the mighty walls of Babylon and trusted in his own power, but this false sense of security blinded him to the real dangers he faced. One of the most striking moments in his story comes during a lavish feast, where Belshazzar used sacred vessels taken from the temple in Jerusalem to praise idols made of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. This act of disrespect and blasphemy showed his disregard for what is holy and his contempt for the God of Israel. In the midst of his celebration, a mysterious hand appeared and wrote a message on the wall. The words, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin, were interpreted by Daniel as a message from God. Belshazzar's days were numbered, he had been weighed and found wanting, and his kingdom would be divided and given to others. This dramatic event reminds us that divine judgment is real and inevitable. No matter how powerful or wealthy someone is, they cannot escape accountability for their actions. Belshazzar's downfall also highlights the danger of trusting in material things for security. While he and his nobles felt safe within the city's walls, Babylon was conquered in a single night by the Medes and Persians, showing that human defenses are powerless against God's will. Another important lesson from Belshazzar's story is the need for humility and repentance. Unlike Nebuchadnezzar, who eventually recognized God's authority and was restored, Belshazzar showed no humility or willingness to change, even after being warned. His stubbornness led to his immediate destruction, reminding us to be humble and to learn from the mistakes of others, rather than repeating them. Finally, the story also highlights the value of faithfulness and wisdom, as demonstrated by Daniel. Even in a hostile environment, Daniel remained true to his faith and was able to speak truth to power with courage and clarity. His example encourages us to stand firm in our beliefs and to act with wisdom, even when it is difficult. In the end, the story of Belshazzar warns us against pride, irreverence, and false security, and calls us to embrace humility, respect for what is sacred, and faithfulness in all circumstances.